Why did she feel the weight of the room pressing against her chest when no one else even seemed to notice? The others leaned back in their chairs, some joking quietly, some staring at the mission screen like it was just another day. But her fingers wouldn't stop tightening against the edge of the table. She told herself it was just the air conditioning, the cold bite of metal under her hand. Yet she knew better. It wasn't fear exactly, it was something heavier. A memory she hadn't asked for but couldn't silence. The briefing officer droned on, his voice steady, measured, confident. He was the kind of man who had probably given 100 of these speeches before. Coordinates, times, weather, evacuation points. All of it fell into place like neat little puzzle pieces, but puzzles didn't bleed, and she knew what was coming wouldn't fit neatly into anyone's box. Special reconnaissance insertion, Northern Ridge, confirmation of hostiles in Sector 6, extraction window is 2 hours no more, his words echoed. Minimal resistance expected. That phrase again, minimal resistance. She felt her jaw tighten. They always said that, and every time the ground told another story. She didn't say anything. She never did during briefings. Speaking up in that room didn't change what waited outside it. Still, her silence had a weight of its own, and sometimes she felt the glances, like the others wanted her to carry something they didn't want to acknowledge. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. One of the younger corporals cracked a joke about cold rations, earning a ripple of laughter. She managed the faintest smile, but it slipped away as fast as it came. Beneath the laughter, she heard the ticking of the clock. Every second felt louder, sharper. And in that ticking, the ghost of another sound. The thump of rotors from years ago, the scream of metal tearing in the dark. A cry cut short. She blinked it back, forcing herself to breathe evenly, to anchor in the present. Because this wasn't then, and she wasn't that girl anymore. When the briefing ended, boots scraped, chairs shifted, and the team filtered out. She stayed seated a moment longer, eyes on the fatting map on the wall. Sector 6, her sector. Someone touched her shoulder. "You good?" She looked up. It was Ortiz, his dark eyes steady, curious. He wasn't the kind to push. "I'm fine," she said softly. The lie landed between them like dust. Ortiz gave a half nod, the kind that said he didn't buy it but he wouldn't press. She appreciated that. Outside, the sun was low, throwing long shadows across the airstrip. The smell of fuel clung to the air, mingling with sweat and dust. Her pack was already waiting, gear squared away with her usual precision. She checked it anyway, fingers running over straps, clips, ammo counts. The rhythm steadied her. Control in small places when the bigger picture spun wild. The team gathered by the bird. A twin-rotor beast, scarred from years of service, whining impatiently as its blades clawed at the evening air. She pulled her helmet on, the world narrowing to the muffled beat of her own breath. Ortiz was checking his rifle. Malik leaned against a crate, humming something tuneless. Even Carter, usually stone-faced, muttered about the weather, all of them carrying pieces of themselves into this mission, pieces they rarely showed until the night was too dark, too long. She wondered if they could see it in her too, the way her shoulders carried something unseen. Or maybe they just thought she was quiet. The ramp clanged down. They filed in. She took her usual spot by the door, harness clipped, rifle resting across her lap. As the engines roared and the bird lifted, the vibrations ran through her bones. And with it came the silence she dreaded. That in-between silence where no one spoke, where the world outside was just clouds and the thrum of blades. That was when the mind drifted. She tried not to, but the memory came again. Her sister's voice. "Promise me you'll come back." It had been years since that night. The last time she had seen her sister's face before the convoy burned, before the call came that shattered the world she thought she knew. She had buried it deep. But tonight, heading for a ridge marked only by a number on a map, it pressed against her chest again. The promise she couldn't keep. Her breath caught, she forced it steady. No one noticed. The bird dipped, tilted, and steadied again. She looked around. Malik's eyes were closed, maybe in prayer. Ortiz was chewing gum like his life depended on it. Carter stared at the floor, lost in whatever thoughts carried him through. Every one of them had ghosts. She wasn't special, but tonight hers felt louder. The green light flashed. The crew chief shouted, 1 minute. Her heart slowed, not faster, slower. This was the part where everything clicked. The world shrank to the mission, the team, the rhythm of breath and movement. The ache in her chest didn't vanish, but it folded into something she could carry. Boots hit dirt. Cold air bit her face. The bird lifted away, sound fading into the night until only the wind remained. They moved low, fast, silent. Shadows across rocks and scrub, every step measured. Every glance a question, safe, not safe, move, hold. The ridge loomed ahead, jagged against the fading light. Somewhere beyond it, their objective. She scanned the horizon through her scope, slow, deliberate. The world sharpened in green hues. Movement, just the sway of branches, a flicker of heat. No, a false echo. She steadied her breath, heartbeat sinking with the scope's rise and fall. Clear, she whispered. The others trusted her word without question. They pressed on. Time stretched thin, every sound magnified. A stone skittered under Malik's boot and everyone froze. Breath held. The wind seemed to pause with them. Then nothing, silence. They moved again. But her gut tightened. Something was wrong. She couldn't place it yet, but the air carried a weight. Like they weren't the only ones on this ridge. She swallowed it down, pressing forward. Focus. Watch, listen. The target site came into view, a cluster of half-buried structures, long abandoned, their outlines sharp against the dirt. Supposedly empty. Supposedly. Her scope caught a shimmer, heat, small, too steady to be an animal. Her pulse kicked. She lowered her voice. Movement, south wall, 2 figures. Ortiz froze, hostile. She watched, shadows moved with purpose, weapons glinted faintly. Hostile. The plan shifted. Quick hand signals passed down the line, adjust positions, cut angles, silent approach. Her hands were steady, but inside that voice returned, the one she tried to silence. Minimal resistance. She didn't believe it then, and she didn't believe it now. They crept closer. The ground crunched under boots, but the wind masked it. The figures ahead didn't move fast, unaware maybe, or maybe waiting. She raised her rifle, finger brushed the trigger, breath slowed. But just as she steadied, a child's cry pierced the night. Her blood froze. It came from inside the structure. High, sharp, unmistakable, not fear, not warning, just the raw cry of someone too young to understand any of it. The team locked eyes, the air thickened. Ortiz whispered, "What the hell is this?" Her chest ached harder than ever. She had been here before, not this place, but this moment. The mission that wasn't what they told them. The kind that stayed with you long after the extraction. And suddenly she knew. This night wasn't about coordinates or sectors or minimal resistance. It was about choices. And the cost they would carry when the sun rose. How do you pull the trigger when the sound of a child's cry is still echoing in your ears? For a moment, none of them moved. They were statues in the dark, shadows pressed low against the dirt, waiting for someone else to decide. Her heart thudded, not with panic but with something heavier. Guilt. The kind that reached backward and forward at once, reminding her of what had already been lost and whispering what might be lost again. Ortiz's whisper cracked the silence. Orders. She should have spoken, but the word caught in her throat. The briefing replayed in her mind. Minimal resistance. Hostiles confirmed. Extraction window 2 hours. Clean, simple, but they hadn't said anything about civilians, certainly not about children. The structure ahead loomed like a question no one wanted to answer. Shadows moved along its edges, deliberate, armed, hostile. But behind those walls, a child's voice had already shifted the mission's meaning. She forced herself to breathe evenly to still her rifle against her shoulder. Her scope traced the faint outline of a man at the south wall. His weapon hung low, his posture unhurried, not patrolling, waiting, guarding. The others waited for her. She knew it. She felt it. Though Ortiz technically had rank in these moments, in the shadows between orders and action, they trusted her eyes more than anything written on paper. Her mind flicked to a night long ago. A convoy, screams, flames curling into the sky, and her sister's voice, the last thing she'd heard before the call cut out. "Promise me you'll come back." Back then, she hadn't been able to keep it. Tonight, she wondered if she would break another promise she hadn't even spoken aloud, to protect the innocent when no one else could. "Two armed confirmed," she whispered finally, voice steady. "But there's at least one civilian inside. Young, could be more." Ortiz exhaled slowly. He didn't question her. Malik shifted, unease in the stiffness of his shoulders. Even Carter, who rarely betrayed emotion, glanced sideways, the smallest flicker of hesitation in his eyes. The silence stretched. No one said the obvious. Civilians complicated everything. They turned a mission into a mess, turned orders into questions. "Options?" Ortiz murmured. She didn't answer right away. Options weren't neat here. They never were. Push forward, eliminate the hostiles, risk collateral. Or pull back, leave the sector unconfirmed, risk the mission. Neither felt like victory. Her eyes locked on the structure. The faint glow of a fire flickered inside, just enough to cast shifting silhouettes on the wall, one of them smaller than the rest. "We go in quiet," she said at last. "Non-lethal if possible. Confirm what's inside before we call it." Ortiz gave the slightest nod, a decision, not approval. The team split, circling like shadows peeling off into the night. She and Ortiz moved left, Carter and Malik right. The dirt crunched soft under boots, the ridge pressing silence down on them like a weight. Closer now, the details sharpened, the smell of smoke, the faint murmur of voices, foreign, low, steady. Words she didn't understand, but tones she recognized: caution, watchfulness. These weren't soldiers trained for battlefields. They were men holding ground for reasons unseen. Her rifle traced their outlines, easy shots if she wanted them, but the child's cry replayed in her chest. She lowered her weapon a fraction. Hand signal, Ortiz advanced, silent, measured, a shadow of his own. Then a crunch too loud, a rock slipping under his boot. The figure by the wall turned, sharp, scanning. Her breath held, finger pressed against trigger. But before he could call alarm, Ortiz moved, quick, precise. Rifle butt against temple. The man crumpled into dirt without a sound. She exhaled, relief and tension tangled together. The second figure hadn't noticed yet. Carter's silhouette melted from the dark, striking fast. Another body dropped, silent. The perimeter was theirs, for now. But inside, the unknown still waited. They regrouped by the south wall, pressed close against the rough stone. Her heartbeat slowed, though the ache in her chest stayed sharp. Ortiz leaned in, whisper low, "You sure about this?" Her eyes met his. For a moment she let him see it, the conflict, the weight, the fear that she was dragging them somewhere no one wanted to go. Then she pushed it down. "I'm sure." They moved. The door creaked, wood splintering faintly as Carter eased it open. A slice of firelight spilled across dirt. They slipped inside. The air was thick, smoke and sweat and something else, the sour tang of fear. The room was crude, walls half-collapsed, roof patched with tin. A fire burned low in the center, throwing shadows that danced across faces. Two women huddled near the fire. One held a child close, rocking instinctively, eyes wide. Another stood near the wall, hands trembling though she held no weapon. And across from them, three men with rifles. Their faces turned at once, shock flashing before instinct. The world slowed. She raised her rifle, breath steady, voice low but sharp. Don't. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The child whimpered, the fire cracked. One of the men tightened his grip on the weapon. A choice hung in the air, fragile as glass. Ortiz's voice cut through, calm, deliberate. Drop it. But the man didn't. His eyes darted, weighing chances. And she saw it, not just defiance but desperation. He wasn't protecting a position. He was protecting people. Her chest ached harder. A shot could end it. Quick, clean, orders fulfilled. But it would end more than just him. Don't, she repeated, voice low, sharper now, command in the sound. The man's jaw tightened. For a second she thought he'd fire anyway. Then slowly, his weapon lowered. The others followed, tension bleeding out of the room like air from a wound. The women clutched the child tighter, eyes darting between faces, not trusting, not understanding. She lowered her rifle just enough. Ortiz exhaled. Carter shifted, still alert, still ready. Malik's eyes softened, but his grip didn't loosen. She scanned the room again. The rifles weren't military issue. The men's clothes were worn, patched, civilian more than soldier. This wasn't an enemy stronghold. It was survival, patched together with firelight and fear. Her gut twisted. The briefing had been wrong, or worse, it had been a lie. She stepped closer, her rifle angled down but steady. The man who'd hesitated met her eyes. There was no language between them, not with words, but his look told enough. These weren't hostiles, these were families. The mission's meaning shifted again, sharp and unyielding. She turned back to Ortiz. His expression was tight, jaw set. He knew what this meant, so did she. Command won't like this, he muttered. She didn't answer, because command didn't matter right now. What mattered were the faces in front of her, the choice already made. And the question that would follow them long after the extraction. What do you do when the mission isn't the mission at all? What do you do when every step you take deepens the lie you're forced to live with? The fire crackled low, sending sparks against the shadows. The men kept their weapons lowered, but their eyes followed every movement. The women clutched the child close, breathing shallow, like even air was a risk. And in the center of it all, her heartbeat hammered against the silence, steady but heavy. The mission had collapsed the second they opened the door. Or maybe it hadn't collapsed at all. Maybe it had only revealed what it really was, a test no briefing could prepare them for. She caught Ortiz's glance. He didn't speak, but the look said everything. What now? Her own throat tightened. There wasn't a clean answer. Every choice was mud. If they called this in, command would spin it into something it was. Hostiles with civilians as shields. That was the phrase. She had heard it before. Cleaned up. Sanitized. Easy for politicians to stomach. Harder for the ones who lived through it. She lowered her weapon further, a gesture of deliberate calm. The men tensed anyway, like even peace was dangerous here. Malik finally broke the silence, his voice low. We don't have time. He was right. The clock didn't stop just because the world shifted. The extraction bird wouldn't wait. Carter's eyes stayed hard, scanning the room like every shadow still held a threat. Orders were to confirm hostiles. We've confirmed. Confirmed. The word landed sharp in her ears. She had confirmed all right, but not what command expected. Her own voice surprised her when it came, calm, certain. We're not reporting this as hostile. Three heads snapped toward her. Ortiz frowned. Malik's lips parted, ready to argue. Even Carter broke his stone silence with a sharp, disbelieving look. You can't be serious, Malik whispered. Her chest tightened, but she didn't waver. Look at them. She gestured subtle toward the women, the child's tiny face half hidden against a shoulder. They're not fighters, they're surviving. Silence stretched heavy. The fire popped, breaking it for a heartbeat. Ortiz sighed, deep and tired, rubbing a hand down his face. You know what command will say if we leave this off the record? She met his eyes. Let them. Because she'd seen the other side of that ledger. civilians written as combatants, children erased in reports, whole nights rewritten until the truth was unrecognizable. Not tonight. One of the men near the wall shifted, murmuring something to the others. The language was foreign, the tone guarded. Then slowly he extended his empty hands, palms open, not surrender, not trust, something in between. Her chest ached harder than before, a human gesture in a world that wanted none. Ortiz muttered, "Damn it," but he didn't raise his rifle again. Malik cursed under his breath, packing once, twice, before finally stilling. Carter didn't say anything, but his silence was no longer defiance. It was acceptance, sharp-edged but real. The decision had been made. Still, questions lingered. What were these families doing here? Why risk this ridge, this ruin, in the middle of a sector everyone said was hostile? What lay beyond the half-collapsed walls that command didn't want them to see? Her instinct screamed there was more. She crouched, setting her rifle low, and pointed gently toward the far corner, a quiet signal to the man who had lowered his weapon first. His eyes darted toward it, then back at her. He hesitated, but after a pause he motioned, a small tilt of his head. Something was hidden there. She moved slowly, deliberately, hands open as she approached. The dirt shifted under her boots, crunched soft. The corner was shadowed, a makeshift covering of tarp and stone. She pulled it back and froze. Beneath it was no weapon, no supply cache. It was a body, small, still, wrapped in cloth too thin to keep the cold away. Her breath caught, the world tunneled. The child couldn't have been more than 6, maybe 7, eyes closed, skin pale, as if sleep had reached too far. She didn't touch the cloth. She didn't have to. The truth pressed sharp against her chest. This wasn't a stronghold. It was a grave. She swallowed hard, the room tilting for a second. Memory surged again, her sister's voice, her laughter, her absence. The convoy burning, the silence after. Her hand trembled just once, before she curled it into a fist. Behind her, Malik cursed again, softer this time. Ortiz muttered something she couldn't hear. Even Carter's breath broke rhythm. The families watched, their eyes unreadable. Not anger, not sorrow, just the hollow exhaustion of people who had lost more than words could carry. She lowered the tarp gently, like closing a door no one wanted opened. When she stood, her voice was steadier than she expected. "We're done here." It wasn't a military conclusion. It wasn't tactical. It was human. Ortiz gave a sharp nod. Not agreement, but respect. Malik exhaled, tension still wired through his frame but softened now. Carter's eyes lingered on the tarp before he turned away. They filed out, the firelight fading behind them. The cold night air hit hard, like punishment. The ridge stretched wide, the stars sharp above. She pulled her rifle close again, anchoring in the familiar weight. But nothing about tonight felt familiar anymore. They moved in silence, each step echoing louder than words. Extraction was still ahead, the mission technically complete, but the truth was heavier now, pressing down on their shoulders. Halfway to the rally point, Ortiz finally spoke. "You know this won't stay quiet." She didn't look at him. "It doesn't have to, it just has to stay honest." He gave a short laugh, humorless. "Honest gets people burned." She glanced at him then, her eyes tired but unyielding. "So does lying." The night swallowed the words. They reached the rally point with minutes to spare. The bird arrived, rotors slicing the dark. Dust whipped around them, biting skin, stinging eyes. As they climbed aboard, she looked back once, toward the ridge, toward the flicker of faint firelight still visible in the distance. And she knew she wouldn't forget it. The sound of a child's cry, the silence of a tarp, the faces of those who had chosen to lower their weapons instead of raise them. The bird lifted, carrying them away. The ridge shrank beneath them, just another dark patch on a map, but inside her chest it stayed sharp, carved into memory. Ortiz sat across from her, eyes closed, head leaned back. Malik stared at the floor, jaw tight, as if chewing a thought he couldn't spit out. Carter polished his weapon, slow, mechanical, like it was easier than thinking. She leaned against the cold metal wall, breath steady, heartbeat slowing. But her mind didn't quiet. She thought of Command's face when she reported in. She thought of the child's cry echoing in the firelight. And she thought of her sister, the promise broken years ago, and the promises she was still trying to keep. When the bird touched down, the airstrip lights harsh against the dark, she braced herself. Because the hardest part wasn't the ridge. It wasn't the silence of choices. The hardest part was walking back into the world that pretended none of it mattered. The storm outside had broken into a steady curtain of rain, hammering against the tin roofs of the base like an angry drum. Soldiers moved quickly between barracks and mess hall, collars pulled high, boots sinking into puddles, the scent of mud mixing with diesel fumes. But inside the war room, the air was bone dry and heavier than stone. Lee Monroe stood at attention, her shirt still damp from the run through the storm, arms at her sides, eyes locked forward. Across the table, Colonel Strickland leaned back in his chair, the faint creak of old leather echoing louder than it should. The room was stripped bare of warmth, maps pinned on walls, red strings marking insurgent routes, a clock that ticked too slow. 3 other officers stood in the shadows, watching her, not a one daring to blink. The hum of the projector filled the silence, throwing static-lit images of terrain onto the wall. "Viper," Strickland finally said, voice low, the gravel of old campaigns grinding through every syllable. "That's what they call you, isn't it?" Lee didn't flinch. "Yes, sir." He smiled, but it wasn't a kind one. Snakes bite when cornered, venomous, silent, dangerous, the kind of thing you don't let inside your home. His gaze cut across her like a scalpel. "Do you think you belong here, soldier?" The question hung like smoke. It wasn't about her rank, it wasn't about her clearance. It was about something deeper. Strickland had seen something, maybe in her file, maybe in her eyes, that unsettled him. Lee's chest rose once, slow and deliberate. She'd been trained to read silence, to find the weight in pauses, and she knew this wasn't curiosity. This was testing. "With respect, sir," she said, her voice measured, "belonging doesn't matter. Effectiveness does." One of the shadowed officers stirred, a slight cough smothered by a fist. Strickland's smile widened just enough to show the edges of his teeth. He stood, the room bending to his presence, and began to circle her like a wolf. "I've read reports," he said, "operations scrubbed from record, units that no longer exist, things whispered in black corridors that don't have names on the doors." He stopped just behind her shoulder. "You wear that shirt like any soldier, but you don't move like one. You don't breathe like one. You think I can't see it." Lee's heartbeat remained steady. She could feel the itch of memory, the desert nights where no one came back but her, the missions stamped omega that dissolved into rumor. She could feel the burn of scars hidden under fabric, ones not even medical staff had logged. She knew better than to answer. Strickland leaned close, his breath brushing her ear. "You think you're here to serve. I think you're here to be watched." The storm rattled the windows like gunfire. For a second, the air carried the weight of decision. She could have snapped back. She could have bared teeth of her own. But Lee remembered the Admiral's whisper in that dimly lit hangar weeks ago. "That tattoo's real. Proof, power, and a warning." She inhaled, slow, steady. "With respect, Colonel, if you think I'm a threat, then you should decide now, because hesitation is deadlier than venom." The other officers stiffened. The projector's static buzzed louder. Strickland's hand twitched, hovering at the table's edge. For a moment it looked like he'd strike her, like the storm outside would bleed into the room. But then he smiled. Not amused, not kind. A shadowed smile, one that promised this was only the beginning. "You're dismissed," he said, turning his back on her. Lee saluted sharply, pivoted, and walked out without breaking stride. The rain swallowed her as she stepped into the open, the storm soaking her hair, the mud clutching at her boots. But in her chest, A fire burned hotter than any storm could smother. She had seen it now, clear as the lightning splitting the sky. The colonel wasn't her superior. He was her hunter. And hunters left trails. Outside, the base buzzed with the nervous energy of soldiers caught between loyalty and doubt. Whispers trailed Lee as she passed. Some called her the ghost. Others, the snake. Few said her real name anymore, but none dared speak above a murmur. Lee headed toward the barracks, but her path shifted at the last moment. Her instincts tugged her toward the motor pool, toward the shadows where men didn't linger unless they had reason. And there it was, a jeep idling, its headlights dimmed, two soldiers inside pretending not to notice her, except they were watching, too still, too patient. She veered left, slipping between supply crates, moving like smoke. If Strickland wanted her boxed in, he'd have to do better than that. The storm masked her steps, the thunder cloaking the grind of her boots. She cut through the mess hall's rear exit and into the narrow alley by the fence line, and that's where she found him, Sergeant Hale. He was leaning against the wall, cigarette ember glowing red, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. His face was a map of scars, but his eyes were steady, sharp, carrying no fear. "You've got a shadow," he said, flicking ash into the puddle. Lee didn't stop moving. "I counted 2 in the jeep, more. 3, maybe 4. They're not on roster, Strickland's boys." She finally paused, meeting his eyes. "And you're telling me because?" Hale shrugged. "Because ghosts don't last long without allies, and I've seen what happens when the colonel decides someone doesn't belong." The thunder swallowed his words, but Lee heard them clear. She narrowed her gaze, searching for the trap. "You've been in long enough to know trust isn't free," she said. He exhaled smoke, rain hissing on the cigarette's glow. "Then call this an investment." Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the motor pool, the shadows, the hunters circling. Lee knew in that flash of light that the board was set, pieces moving unseen. Strickland wasn't going to stop. And neither was she. The storm raged on. But Lee Monroe had lived through storms worse than this. And for the first time since she put the shirt back on, she felt the old fire ignite, the fire that made her viper. This wasn't just survival anymore, this was war. The rain hadn't stopped. It drummed against the barracks, seeped through cracks in the roof, and turned the parade ground into a marsh of sucking mud. Soldiers moved with their heads low, shoulders hunched, their usual banter swallowed by the storm. The entire base felt heavier, quieter, as if the sky itself pressed down on them. Lee Monroe sat on her bunk, peeling back her damp boots, every muscle in her body still wound tight from the encounter with Colonel Strickland. Her reflection stared back from the polished steel of her locker, a face calm, composed, but behind the eyes, a storm equal to the one outside raged. Her gut told her this wasn't paranoia. The jeep with Strickland's men, Sergeant Hale's warning, the colonel's words, "You don't breathe like one of us." The hunt had begun and she was the prey, but prey could turn, strike, and leave poison of its own. She drew the thin chain from under her shirt. The dog tag wasn't regulation issue, it was etched with a single symbol, a triangle within a circle, weathered, burned into the metal itself. Most soldiers would think it graffiti, but to those who knew it was something darker, the insignia of Project Omega. She closed her fist around it, breathing once, twice. Then she tucked it back beneath the shirt and rose. If Strickland was circling, she couldn't wait for his move. She needed to see what strings he was pulling, and why. The war room was dark when she slipped in, hours after lights out. She timed her steps with the rhythm of patrol boots outside, slid through shadows like water, and eased into the chair at the far end of the table. The projector hummed faintly, left on standby, its light a weak glow against the maps. She moved quickly, pulling open drawers, scanning files, her fingers skimming over rosters, supply sheets, casualty logs. Nothing out of place on the surface. But then she found it, a red folder, its edges frayed, sealed with a wax stamp. Her stomach tightened. Wax wasn't standard military practice. This was something older, something meant to be hidden inside plain order. She cracked the seal, flipped the folder open, and the first page hit her like a bullet. Operation Silencer. Date classified. Lead asset Viper. Her name wasn't in bold. It wasn't even her name. It was the code name she thought she'd buried with the desert, with the blood and the silence of missions that never happened. The next page was worse. Grainy black and white photos, some too blurred to identify, others sharp as razors. An outpost in flames, a convoy cut to ribbons, insurgent leaders marked with excess. And beneath each image, confirmed by Asset V. Lee's pulse hammered. She turned the page, more images, more signatures, reports stamped with her mark, her code, but she hadn't signed these, she hadn't written them. Someone was building a case. Someone was rewriting her past, brick by brick, file by file. A floorboard creaked. She froze, eyes snapping to the doorway. Sergeant Hale stood there, shadows carving his face into half-light. He didn't move to draw his weapon, didn't raise his voice. He just looked at her, then at the folder in her hands. "You weren't supposed to find that," he said. Lee slid the folder shut, her movements deliberate, controlled. "But I did." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, the storm's roar muffling outside. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the projector. "That file's bait," he said finally. "Strickland wanted you to see it. He wanted to see what you'd do when you realized the ground under you was already gone." Lee's eyes narrowed. "And you're just here to deliver the message." Hale shook his head, rain dripping from his cap onto the floor. "No, I'm here to tell you it goes deeper. Strickland, not building this on his own. He's taking orders from people who don't exist on paper, people who want the Omega files locked, buried, and sealed with your name stamped across the coffin." The words sank like lead. Lee had suspected shadows, but this was something bigger. She leaned back, folding her arms, every fiber of her training forcing her voice calm. "Then why warn me? Why risk standing here at all?" Hale met her gaze, and in his eyes she saw no fear, only weariness. "Because I was Omega too." The projector buzzed louder, as if even the machine reacted to the weight of the truth. Lee studied him, measuring his words, his scars, his silence. It fit too well. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think you were the only one left. You weren't, but the others, they didn't walk away. Some disappeared, some weren't allowed to." His jaw tightened. "Strickland doesn't hunt you because he fears you. He hunts you because if you dig far enough, you'll find the bodies he buried to get his stars." The storm cracked outside, lightning bleaching the room white for a heartbeat. Lee felt the surge of old instincts: fight, vanish, strike before struck. But she wasn't just Viper anymore. She was a soldier in plain view, a ghost wearing skin the system wanted to peel away. She closed the folder, slid it across the table toward Hale. "Then we dig." The next days blurred into shadow games. Lee moved like a ghost through the base, training when watched, vanishing when unseen. Hale became her silent anchor, feeding her whispers, pointing her to cracks in the colonel's perfect wall. She saw it in coded supply orders that made no sense, in flights logged but never taken, in casualty lists with names scrubbed too clean. And always Strickland's eyes followed her. At mess, on the training field, even in chapel where silence was supposed to be sacred. He didn't need to say a word. His presence was enough, a hunter content to let the prey feel the leash tighten. But prey that knew the wire could cut it too. One night in the comms bunker, Lee slid past the guards on patrol and into the heart of the base's network. Screens flickered, static popping, the hum of machines vibrating through the floor. She patched in with fingers steady as stone, bypassing firewalls like old muscle memory. And there it was, a transfer order, not for supplies, not for men, for her. Asset V. Transfer, midnight, 2 days from now. Destination, REDSTED. Authorization, Colonel S. Strickland. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't court-martial. This wasn't demotion. This was disappearance. A vanishing act stamped in ink, the kind of transfer where you left in chains and never came back. She saved the file, wiped the trace, and stepped back into the storm. The rain lashed at her face, washing the static hum from her skin. For the first time since she'd worn the shirt again, Lee Monroe felt the line cross. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about war. And if Strickland wanted her erased, he'd learn what happened when a ghost stopped running and turned to strike. The order was signed. Midnight, 2 days. Her disappearance wrapped in neat red ink, authorized by a man who smiled while sharpening knives. But something about the timing gnawed at her. Why wait 2 days? Why not chain her tonight? Why leave a ghost breathing longer than necessary? Lee Monroe had lived her life on edges like this, edges where silence was louder than gunfire, where hesitation killed more often than bullets. She knew one truth: if your enemy gave you time, it wasn't a gift. It was a trap. So she didn't wait. That night after lights out, she moved through the barracks like smoke. No sound. No shadow lingering too long. Sergeant Hale trailed her at a distance, his steps as disciplined as hers, 2 phantoms moving through a world that thought it was asleep. The comms bunker had given her a piece of the puzzle, but to burn Strickland's rope, she needed the rest of the knots. And knots always sat in one place: his office. She avoided it before, because ghosts didn't stroll through the wolf's den, but tonight wasn't about avoiding. Tonight was about showing her teeth. The corridor leading to the office was empty, save for a single bulb that flickered with the storm's rhythm. Lee knelt by the lock, her fingers working the tumblers with an old precision she swore she'd never use again. The door gave with a sigh, and she slipped in. The office smelled of leather and smoke. Strickland's chair loomed behind the desk like a throne carved from arrogance. Papers lay in neat stacks, too neat. He wasn't just a predator. He was the kind who polished his claws before tearing flesh. She started with the desk drawers. Ledgers, memos, requisition forms. Nothing screamed conspiracy. Then she found a locked steel box tucked beneath files marked training schedules. She eased it open with a knife's tip. Inside were flash drives, dozens, each labeled with numbers, dates, code names. Her pulse climbed. This was it, the buried veins, the blood of secret Strickland bled others to protect. She slipped one into the port of his computer, the screen flickering alive. Lines of text appeared: after-action reports, mission briefings. Her name threaded through too many of them. Always Asset V, always tied to blood spilled in shadows. But then she found something that stopped her cold. Project Omega Termination Protocol. The words burned on the screen. Her finger hovered over the trackpad. She clicked. The file opened, and with it her past unfolded. Names of operatives, dates of deployments, not just hers, others. Dozens. Men and women she'd trained beside, bled beside. Some she thought retired. Some she thought vanished by choice. All listed. All marked with one word stamped in brutal black: neutralized. Her throat tightened. And then she saw it: Hale Marcus, status pending. She leaned back, the air gone from her lungs. He told her he was Omega. He hadn't told her he was marked for erasure. Her hand brushed the chain under her shirt, the tag pressing like fire against her skin. She saved the file onto a drive of her own, slipped it into her pocket, and powered down the machine. But as the screen dimmed, another light glowed, red. A silent alarm hidden beneath the desk, blinking like an eye that had just opened. The sound of boots echoed in the hall. Lee's blood iced. The door slammed open. Strickland stood there, rain dripping from his cap, eyes gleaming. Behind him, 2 guards raised their rifles. He smiled, not wide, not manic, just enough to slice. "And here I thought you were smarter, Viper." Her fingers brushed the flash drive in her pocket. One step forward and she could throw the chair. Dive. Run, but she didn't. She stood still, breathing slow, every muscle coiled. Strickland waved the guards in. You know what the problem with ghosts is. They start thinking they're real, start walking into rooms they don't belong in. His voice was smooth, deliberate, the kind that belonged to men who'd buried too many sins under medals. Lee didn't flinch. You built files on me, forged reports. Why? Strickland's smile didn't move, but his eyes hardened. Because history belongs to the man who writes it. And you're not history, you're a liability. You and every other mistake the Omega Project spat out. Her jaw tightened. Hale was Omega. A flicker barely there, but she saw it. A muscle in his cheek twitched. He should have stayed dead with the rest. The words hung like smoke, and Lee understood. The file wasn't just protocol, it was Strickland's ledger. He wasn't burying Omega to protect secrets. He was burying it to protect himself. The guard stepped closer, rifles ready. Strickland's voice softened, almost kind. You've got spirit, Monroe, I'll give you that. But spirit doesn't keep the ground from swallowing you whole. Midnight tomorrow you'll vanish. Or you'll vanish now. Either way, this base will keep running and no one will remember you were ever here. Lee's heart hammered, but not from fear, from rage. She met his gaze, unblinking. You'll remember. The silence after was sharp enough to cut. Strickland's eyes narrowed. For the first time his smile faltered. He turned on his heel. Take her. The guard stepped in. Lee moved first. The chair flew sideways, crashing into the first guard's knees. He stumbled, rifle clattering. She drove her elbow into the second guard's throat, his gasp lost in the thunder cracking outside. A rifle swung toward her, muzzle flashing. She dropped low, the bullet shredding Strickland's map behind her. Her boot caught the first guard's chin, snapping his head back. The second clawed for breath, collapsing against the desk. Strickland didn't shout, didn't fire. He just watched, his eyes cold, calculating, as if he were studying a lab rat thrashing against the maze walls. Lee stood in the wreckage, chest heaving. The flash drive burned in her pocket. Evidence, proof, but not enough, not yet. Strickland stepped back into the hall, calm as ever. Run all you like, Viper. Tomorrow the ground swallows you. And then he was gone, leaving her with two unconscious guards and a storm that refused to stop. She didn't sleep that night. Hale met her in the mess hall, where the rain drummed loud enough to swallow words. She slid the flash drive across the table, her hand steady even as her insides churned. You're on it, she said. Hale froze, his fingers hovering above the drive. Termination protocol, she whispered. You were marked pending. He leaned back, jaw tightening, eyes closing for a beat too long. When he opened them again, they were harder, older. I knew it, he said quietly. I knew the moment they pulled me back in. They don't let ghosts live. They just wait for the grave to dig itself. Lee studied him. So what now? He pocketed the drive. Now we decide if we let them finish it, or if we finish them first. The storm outside roared like an answer. And Lee Monroe, for the first time since putting the shirt back on, felt something fierce stir inside her. Not just survival, not just defiance. Rebellion. Why did the storm finally break that morning? The sky over the base cleared for the first time in days, sunlight spilling over mud and barbed wire. Soldiers stretched in the parade yard, grateful for warmth, unaware that a different storm brewed in silence among them. Lee Monroe watched from the mess hall window, her coffee untouched, the flash drive heavy in her pocket. Sunlight should have eased her, but instead it sharpened everything. Edges, instincts, the voice inside that whispered, this isn't survival anymore. This is war. Hale sat across from her, his face half-lit, half-shadow. He hadn't said much since she'd shown him his name on the list. But silence had its own weight. His jaw clenched every time the colonel passed by. Tonight, Lee whispered, low enough the hum of chatter drowned it. Hale's eyes met hers. No surprise, just a nod. They moved like shadows through the day, each step rehearsed but never spoken aloud. Hale slipped into the motor pool, checked trucks, fuel lines, escape routes. Lee spent hours in the comms bunker, learning the system's veins, mapping which channels were clean, which were tapped. Everywhere she went, she felt Strickland's eyes on her. Not in sight, not always, but in the shift of soldiers' gazes, in the way conversations broke when she entered, in the stiffness of guards who lingered too close. She wasn't paranoid. She was hunted, and hunters liked watching their prey wear itself thin. By dusk the plan was set, simple, desperate, enough. Steal Strickland's files, broadcast them, force the truth into light before he could bury her in shadow. The base quieted as night fell. The storm clouds returned, not with thunder but with a heavy stillness, as though the air itself held its breath. Lee and Hale met in the empty armory. He loaded a sidearm, slid a knife into his boot, checked his watch once. His movements were practiced, efficient, but she caught the flicker in his eyes, an old memory resurfacing, a ghost whispering in his ear. "You don't have to come," Lee murmured. His laugh was soft, bitter. "They already marked me, Monroe. Only question left is how I go out." Their eyes met. No speeches, no promises, just the understanding of two people standing at the edge of the same cliff. The command building loomed ahead, its windows glowing faint against the night. Guards paced, rifles slung, their boots clicking like metronomes. Lee and Hale moved in the gaps between footsteps, cutting across shadows until they reached the service entrance. Hale picked the lock in seconds, his hands steady despite the storm inside him. The hallways inside smelled of polish and dust, the kind of sterile control Strickland prized. They slipped past offices, every creak of the floorboards a drumbeat in their chests. When they reached the colonel's office, Lee froze. The door was open. Light spilled into the hall. She raised her hand, signaling Hale back. They edged closer, silent, eyes straining. Strickland sat inside, alone, a glass in his hand, boots propped on his desk, eyes fixed on the map pinned to the wall. He didn't turn, didn't move, just spoke, voice calm as stone. "You really think I wouldn't see this coming?" Lee's blood ran cold. He rose slowly, setting the glass down, turning to face them. The smile was back, calm, inevitable. "You were Omega. You should know better. Every move you make I've already written." Hale stepped forward, gun low but ready. "Then you know how this ends, Colonel." Strickland chuckled, shaking his head. "Ends? No, this doesn't end. Omega doesn't end, it feeds. It buries its mistakes under new ground, new blood. You were assets, not soldiers. Assets get burned when they're spent." Lee's voice cut through. "And you, what are you, Strickland, asset or mistake?" For the first time his smile cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but enough. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a pistol, laying it atop the files. Not pointing it, just resting his hand near it. A dare. "You want the files, take them. But the moment you do, the alarms sound, the walls close, and you vanish before you ever reach the gate." Lee's fingers twitched, but she didn't move. Hale's breath steadied beside her. Strickland leaned back, eyes glinting. "This is your last choice, Viper. Fade quietly, or burn and take nothing with you." The silence stretched. And then Hale moved. Not for the pistol, for the drives. He swept them from the desk into his bag, fast as a whip. The colonel's hand shot to his gun. Lee was faster. She slammed the desk upward, the pistol clattering. The room erupted. Hale shoved the bag against his chest, diving for the door. Lee grappled Strickland, the two crashing into the map, pins scattering like shrapnel. His strength was brutal, fueled by rage, but she'd fought monsters in shadows before. She twisted, drove her knee into his ribs, his grunt drowned by thunder outside. Hale's shout cut through, "Go!" Lee wrenched free, sprinting after him as alarms shrieked to life. Red lights bathed the hallways, boots thundered, shouts roared. They ran, Past startled guards, through choking sirens, down stairwells where shadows flickered with muzzle flashes. Bullets ripped into walls, sparks spraying. Hale fired back, clearing the path, his teeth bared in silence. Every turn tightened the noose. Every second the base closed in. And then they reached the comms bunker. Lee slammed the door shut, bolting it as Hale shoved the drives into the console. The screens lit, code racing, their proof spilling like veins opening. Images, reports, termination orders, Strickland's ledger of blood. Her hands flew over the keys, patching the feed into the satellite uplink. The progress bar crawled, slow, agonizing, as fists pounded the bunker door. Hale covered the entrance, weapon raised, eyes locked. Faster, Monroe. She didn't answer, she couldn't. Her breath came ragged, sweat dripping, heart pounding in rhythm with the bar climbing 20%, 30, 40. The door shook, boots stomped, voices barked orders. 50, 60. A crack, wood splintered. Hale fired through the gap, the recoil slamming his shoulder. 70, 80. Lee whispered under her breath, not prayer, not plea, just will. Come on, come on. 95, 96. The door exploded inward. Soldiers stormed. Hale roared, firing, holding them at the choke point, his body a wall against the tide. 99. A bullet tore into his side. He staggered but stayed upright, gun blazing. 100. The bar blinked green. Upload complete. Lee's scream tore through the bunker. It's out, it's out. Hale turned, blood soaking his uniform, and for a heartbeat his face softened. Then we won. Strickland's voice cut through the chaos, calm, cold, from behind the soldiers. No, not yet. Lee spun, eyes locking on him. He stepped into the bunker, pistol steady, expression carved in stone. And the storm outside howled as the three of them, ghost, traitor, soldier, stood in the final silence before the fire. The hangar was silent, too silent. The hum of machinery had stopped, the chatter of soldiers gone, even the faint echo of boots across the steel floors had disappeared. Only one figure remained. She stood at the far end, helmet tucked under her arm, her uniform dusty, torn in places where the mission had tried to break her. Her body ached, her spirit felt cracked, yet her will remained untouched. She placed the helmet down gently on the bench beside her. For a moment she simply breathed, each inhale heavy, each exhale trembling. Behind her, shadows stretched long as the sun set through the cracked hangar doors, painting her in fatting gold. She had made it back, but not everyone had. The silence was their absence. She thought of their faces, those who had laughed with her, cursed at the cold, whispered confessions in the dark between firefights. She thought of the sergeant who never got to send his final letter, of the young private who never saw a sunrise after his first mission. The weight pressed hard on her chest, yet she didn't collapse. She couldn't. A pair of boots echoed faintly behind her. Someone else was there. A medic, quiet, holding a clipboard they didn't want to look at. Their voice cracked when they spoke. They said you carried him back yourself. Is it true? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she closed her eyes and replayed the moment, the dead weight on her shoulders, the mud sucking at her boots, the gunfire that refused to stop. She had walked because stopping wasn't an option. She had carried him because leaving him wasn't a choice. Finally, she opened her eyes and whispered, he wasn't going to be left behind. The medic nodded but didn't push further. Some things didn't need explanation. Outside, distant rotors began to spin, preparing for another mission she wouldn't be part of tonight. For the first time in weeks, no orders waited for her. No coordinates, no code words, only silence. And yet, she wasn't free. Her mind replayed the choices, the near misses, the blood she couldn't wash from her hands no matter how hard she scrubbed. She sat down slowly, hands trembling, staring at her reflection in the cracked visor of her helmet. She almost didn't recognize the eyes staring back. Tired, haunted, but unbroken. That was when the colonel appeared. He didn't speak at first. He just stood across from her, watching. She felt his gaze heavy and calculating but also softer than she expected. When he finally spoke, his words weren't orders. They weren't commendations either. They were simple, human. You stood when no one else could. Her throat tightened. She wanted to respond, but words caught in the tangle of exhaustion and grief. He didn't wait for her to answer. He simply stepped closer, placed a hand on her shoulder. Not heavy, not commanding, just steady. You don't have to carry all of it alone. But she knew she would, because that was who she was. That was what the mission had made her. The rotors outside grew louder, shaking the hangar with their thrum. Others would go, fight, bleed. And maybe they would come back, maybe not. She rose again, helmet in hand, body screaming in protest but spirit pushing forward. She walked toward the noise, toward the weight of it all. She didn't need applause. She didn't need recognition. All she needed was to keep standing for them, for the ones who couldn't. As the doors opened wider and the light cut across her figure, she paused, just once. Her breath steadied, her eyes lifted. In the stillness, one truth echoed louder than any battle cry. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And with that, she stepped into the fading light, carrying silence, memory, and an unbroken will into whatever waited next.